Hello, viewers. This is the summary of the novel Pride and Prejudice, written by Jane Austen. And I am Gajendra Vashisht from VR Systems. We are starting with the summary of Pride and Prejudice. This is a romantic novel written by Jane Austen. This is a romantic novel written by Jane Austen and published in 1813. Here, Elizabeth, the second daughter of Bennet, who is the dynamic protagonist in this novel, learn about the repercussions of hasty judgments and comes to appreciate the difference between the superficial goodness and the actual goodness. Its humor lies in the honest depiction of the manners, education, marriage, and money during the Regency era. Now, we can say this was the Georgian era, the sub-period was Regency era. This is like the other times associated with their status and wealth. In England, having manners and etiquettes was and as important as being educated. A person's etiquettes and manners were associated with his status of wealth. Ladies always dressed modestly, good hairstyle with bonnet. Your manners were scrutinized and gossiped about. Grooming was of high importance, and the art of conversation was highly regarded. Their social calendar would include visit to friends, painting, sports, or play on piano. They also were fond of hosting parties and dinners. This was the mannerism, how they were socializing. Now we come to the novel Pride and Prejudice, written by Jane Austen. So this is first we come to the list of the characters. Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, head of the family. They have got 5 daughters. Jane Bennet, she's the eldest one. Beautiful, really beautiful and adorable. Elizabeth Bennet, she's witty. Mary Bennet, third one. Fourth is Kitty, and fifth one is Lydia. She's the youngest child, and mother has spoiled her because she's lovable. On the other side, we have got Mr. Collins, who is a distant cousin of Mr. Bennet and is the real heir of the property. If one of the daughters will not marry Mr. Collins, the property will automatically go to Mr. Collins, because that was the male dominating society and lawfulness of that time. Lady Catherine is a wealthy lady. She's auntie of Collins. Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner, they are uncle and aunt of Bennet's sisters. Now, on the other side of, we can say that Mr. Charles Bingley, a young man, he has got 2 sisters. Then another one is Fitzwilliam Darcy. He's a wealthy friend of Mr. Charles Bingley. He comes to see Mr. Bingley, but he lives there for a long time. Then Georgiana Darcy is the younger sister of Fitzwilliam Darcy, the friend of Bingley. Then George Wickham, that is another character in this play, who's actually he's a colonel in the military, English military. So like this, she's Elizabeth is the real protagonist in the novel because the story turns around her. Now we come to the other information in the Pride and Prejudice. Longbourn House, this is the house of Bennet's, Mr. Bennet's house, where he lives with his family, 5 daughters and his wife. Now this is the introduction of the characters in real sense. This is Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Bennet. Then they have got 5 daughters. The eldest one is Jane. She's really beautiful and adorable. Elizabeth, very wise, witty. She's smart. Mary is the third one. Kitty, her actual name is Catherine. She's Kitty. And the 5th one is Lydia. She's the youngest one. Now, on the other side, we come to know that Charles Bingley is a young bachelor who comes to live in the Longbourn, near Longbourn, in the Netherfield Parks. Charles Bingley has got two sisters, Lysa Hurst, and she's married, and Caroline, she's a spinster. Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy has got one sister, younger sister, and she's Georgiana. Name is Georgiana. Then there's another character, Mr. Collins, who is a distant cousin of Mr. Bennet, and I have told you already that otherwise he's a real heir to the Bennet's property at Longbourn. If one of the daughters of Mr. Bennet do not marry him, and there's a Lady Catherine, a character on my other side. She's aunt of Mr. Collins. Mr. Wickham, he comes in the party. He is a colonel who later he has eloped with Lydia, the youngest daughter of Mr. Bennet. So Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner, they are distant relatives, uncle and aunt. Now we come to Netherfield Parks. Now the story goes like this. Mr. and Mrs. Bennet live in Longbourn village of the Hertfordshire in England. In the 19th century, they have 5 daughters: Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia. Mrs. Bennet comes to know that a rich bachelor arrived in their neighborhood in Netherfield. She attempts to persuade her husband, Mr. Bennet, to visit the young neighbor named Charles Bingley. To Mrs. Bennet's delight, the meeting was fruitful, and the Bennet's family were invited to the ball party at the assembly rooms that entire neighborhood will attend. Now, at the ball, Mr. Bingley, cheerful manners, they go to Bennet's house. I have shown. Next, the whole of the family is invited, and the ball party starts. The Bennet family is invited to the ball party. At the ball, Mr. Bingley's cheerful manners make him popular among the guests. He appears to be attracted to Jane, the eldest daughter of Bennet's, with whom he dances twice. He dances twice. The 5 Bennet sisters, they are very happy at this party. So Bingley asks Jane to dance with him, and twice they dance. And Jane and Bingley, this couple, they are at just the best couple in the ball party. Everyone is appreciating. And now, Mr. Collins, distant relative of Mr. Bennet, he approaches Elizabeth to dance with him. She declines very politely. Now, Elizabeth is there, and Mr. Charles Bingley asks her friend, Mr. Darcy, to dance with Elizabeth, but he refuses, saying that she's not of his status and cannot tempt him. Elizabeth overhears what she's saying, and he presumes that he's an arrogant person. In the meantime, the girls, Elizabeth finds this amusing, and she jokes with her sisters and friends. Mr. Bingley's sister, they have got a liking for when Jane, Elizabeth refused Mr. Collins to dance. He approached Miss Charlotte Lucas. She's a friend of Elizabeth. She's growing overage, and she accepts the proposal of Mr. Collins. Now, Mr. Bingley comes to the house many times, and they get, the Charlotte Lucas and Collins get married. Now, there is an invitation to Jane for dinner from Mr. Bennet's sister, Caroline. Jane goes to Bingley's house at the dinner, invitation from Bingley's sister Caroline. On the way, you know, she catches cold because it's already raining, and she's caught in rain showers and develop a bad cold. Caroline Bingley keeps her at her place till she recovers. Now, Elizabeth goes to see her sister Jane at the Netherfield Park. Mr. Darcy finds himself becoming attracted to Elizabeth and states that she has got beautiful eyes. While, in the meantime, Fitzwilliam Darcy was there, but she's not happy because he had given him sarcastic remarks. There's a couple with the Charles Bingley and Jane. In the meantime, Mr. Wickham is also there. He tells that Mr. Darcy is not a good person. He's a charming officer, Mr. Wickham. His full name is George Wickham, who tells that he was deprived of a wonderful occupation by Mr. Darcy one time. He further states that Mr. Darcy is not a good person. He is haughty, arrogant, and a man of low manners. He can be a stone in one's relations. Now, there are good relations between Charles Bingley and Jane. There was a bad experience that Elizabeth had with Mr. Darcy, and she thinks that he's arrogant and a very rough person. So after some time, when the ball party is over, and when after some days, Caroline sends a letter. Actually, Darcy's sister is interested in Mr. Bingley. So she's jealous. She's a snobbish sister. She's jealous of this relationship. Now, Caroline sends, after some days, Caroline sends a letter of sorry. A letter to Jane goes, and she reads this letter where it's written that we are going to London back, and you are not going to marry my brother, Mr. Charles Bingley, and we are leaving Netherfield Parks for good. This is just like a bolt from blue for Jane's. She's very sad because there were 3 pairs. Now, what happens? She's very sad. After some days, in the springtime, Elizabeth visits her friend Shirley and Mr. Collins. They are already married in Kent. Elizabeth and her hosts are invited to Rosing Park, the imposing home of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Colonel Fitzwilliam Darcy tells Elizabeth that how Darcy saved his friend from undesirable match. Elizabeth realizes perhaps he is the real reason behind it, and she starts hating him. That is the word prejudice. She has developed a prejudice against Mr. Darcy, and Darcy is proud. That's why the name of the novel has been written, Pride and Prejudice. Now, Darcy declares her love for Elizabeth when she comes to meet at the Rosing Park, because somebody had told Elizabeth already. The household of the Darcy's palace had told that Mr. Darcy is otherwise a very good person. He's a bit arrogant and he's a bit rough, but he's very nice at heart. He's the one. Darcy got some he wants to save himself from the remarks of this girl, Elizabeth. So he sends her a letter and tells Elizabeth that how Darcy saved his friend Bingley, and tells that Darcy gives Elizabeth a letter, explaining that Wickham, the son of his late father's steward, had refused the living his father's rearrangement for him, and rather he was given money for it. Wickham quickly squandered the money and impoverished again. Asked for the living again, he was refused, and then he tried to elope with his 15 years younger sister, Georgiana, for his considerable property. Now, this was a declaration. He declared everything. Some months later, Elizabeth, when she goes to meet Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner on a tour to Derbyshire, they visit Pemberley House of Darcy's estate. The housekeeper tells Elizabeth that Mr. Darcy is a very generous person, kind-hearted, and he has helped many persons in fix. He's a bit outspoken and serious. That's how it shows his arrogance. Darcy returns unexpectedly there. He is exceedingly gracious that time and asks to meet his sister Georgiana. Elizabeth is highly delighted to this kind of treatment. She is remorseful for the developing prejudice in haste against Mr. Darcy. So everything is clear in her mind that Mr. Darcy told him in the letter also that why I hated Mr. Wickham, because he eloped with, he wanted to, elope with his 15-year-old sister Georgiana, and he was after my property, my father's property. He is a greedy kind of person. In the meantime, she hears there comes a news. They start liking each other. In the meantime, a news comes. That Lydia had eloped with Wickham. It was a bolt from blue. She hastily goes to her house and tells her elder sister, she wants to console her parents. She tells her elder sister that Mr. Wickham was a wicked person who eloped with the sister Lydia, the youngest sister Lydia, and she tells that still he loves Mr. Charles Bingley, loves him, and Darcy is a nice personality. He is the one who helped Lydia in marriage, because Wickham was asking some money for marriage, and he gave them money, and they settled the marriage. Now there was happy ending, because Elizabeth was remorseful for the developing prejudice in haste against Mr. Darcy, who is a nice person. Now every confusion in her mind, that is clear, and there is now the Elizabeth is the protagonist in the novel who learns about repercussions of the hasty judgments that comes to appear, the difference between superficial goodness and actual goodness. Elizabeth tells the truth to the sister that got a wrong impression about Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy. Both are good persons. And you see, Mr. Charles Bingley, proposes Jane for marriage, and that is acceptable, and they happily marry. Next, Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth couple, they also happily marry. And next, after some days, Lydia comes with Wickham. They are already married, and tells everybody in the family that how Mr. Darcy had helped in her marriage with Mr. Wickham. So this is the end of the novel. Jane Austen, she has much appreciated the protagonist, Elizabeth, because the whole story revolves around her. Thank you very much. I hope you find it good. Now my WhatsApp number has been given, 93165-18289 from VR Systems. This is Gajendra Vashisht. You can approach me. Thank you very much. I'm giving you more information, and I'm giving you more my videos on different subjects in English literature. Thank you very much, my dear friends.